Lebanese American journalist Rania Khalek, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. It's my honor to be with you.
Thank you. Rania, I just want to start off by saying that we're really proud that in every chance that you get on national television or through your show, Dispatches, you're always defending Lebanon. You always have our back from the US. I want to start by asking you, how do you see at first the attacks on Lebanon recently?
Well, thank you for your very kind words. It's my obligation as a Lebanese person to do everything in my power to use my platform and my voice to defend my country when it's under attack. And the current escalation that's taken place over the last month has been absolutely devastating for all of us. The last year has been crazy. As you know, we've watched Gaza be destroyed from Lebanon, with the Israelis every single day threatening to turn Lebanon into Gaza. Mm-hmm. And until September, there was this, sort of what seemed like a controlled tit for tat between the Israelis and Hezbollah, where we were able to live our lives pretty normally in Lebanon, except for if you're from a village near the south border. And now all that seems to have changed overnight with this massive escalation. But I think this escalation was always inevitable. It was always going to happen at some point because Israel is a psychotic, genocidal settler state with expansionist ambitions. And they want to destroy anybody in the region who stands in the way of their agenda. And they want to dominate everybody in the region. And so at some point, we were going to have this war. It was inevitable. At some point, Israel, they've invaded Lebanon throughout their entire existence repeatedly. And even though every single time they failed, as long as they exist as this settler genocidal state, they'll always do this. They will always try to invade and control Lebanon, just like they will always try to occupy and steal more and more Palestinian land.
Yes. How long do you think the US can still justify Israel's attacks on civilians in Lebanon and in Gaza? I mean, it's been going on for over a year. Can it still go much further?
The scary reality is that, yes, the U.S. will continue to defend anything Israel does, all the atrocities Israel inflicts on civilians in Palestine, in Lebanon, in Syria, and beyond, because Israel is a huge investment for the U.S. I mean, the U.S., without this recent genocide, without this recent war, the U.S. already every single year gives Israel $3.8 billion in military aid. Israel is a military base for the United States. It's a police for the United States in the Middle East. It exists to carry out U.S. interests in the Middle East. And it's been a huge investment since its existence. Back in, I think, the 1980s, Joe Biden, who's now the president of the U.S., was back then either a congressman or a senator. And there's a video of him saying, if Israel didn't exist, we would have to create one because of the American interests it serves in the Middle East. So right now, Israel is under threat by the adversaries around it because October 7th poked a huge hole in Israel's military supremacy in the region. So everything Israel is doing right now is to reestablish its military legitimacy and supremacy across the region to make everybody fear it. And as an arm of the U.S. is invested in Israel dominating the region because it dominates the region for the United States. Mm-hmm. That's why the U.S. is willing to destroy the entire international order that it spent decades creating to protect this military base it spends so much money on in the Middle East. That's why you see the U.S. saying one thing, for example, about Russia and Ukraine and international humanitarian law, and then throwing all of that out the window when it comes to Israel. At this point, we have seen Israel bomb hospitals intentionally, execute doctors and patients. They intentionally kill journalists. They drop white phosphorus. They might even be using depleted uranium. They're dropping 2,000-pound U.S.-supplied bunker buster bombs on residential buildings in both Gaza and South Beirut full of families. The U.S. has justified all of these things. There is nothing at this point that the U.S. won't justify. Mm-hmm. So I wouldn't depend on the U.S. to stop Israel based on any sort of morality or based on any sort of international law. They have destroyed international law. It doesn't exist anymore because of what Israel and the U.S. are doing. which is why the only thing that will stop Israel at this point is people in the United States forcing their government to stop arming Israel, and also Israel facing consequences in the region by those who shoot back at it. That's the only thing that will stop Israel.
Yes. Well, I want to hear your opinion about that. How come Israel's right to defend itself is so important to the US? Meanwhile, us in Lebanon, we're not even allowed to say we want to defend our land. We are the landowners, and we're not even allowed to defend ourselves. And when Hezbollah comes and says, I want to protect my land, he becomes suddenly a terrorist in the eyes of the world, not even the US.
Well, so I just want to say one thing about what you just said with regard to Hezbollah being a terrorist organization. It's not in the eyes of the world. It's just the US and the Europeans. They make up a very small portion of the world. In fact, Hezbollah's political wing isn't classified as a terrorist organization by many European countries. So a very small minority of the world, the US, Israel, and some European countries, are the ones saying Hezbollah is a terrorist organization. The vast majority of the world deals with Hezbollah as a legitimate political organization. And the vast majority of the world does understand that Lebanon as a sovereign country absolutely has the right to defend itself. This goes back to a colonial legacy. The Americans are in charge of the world and they get to create the rules, but their rules are all double standards. It's all hypocrisy. On the one hand, they want to say that Israel has a right to defend itself. But what do they call defending itself? They call Israel bombing hospitals and starving premature babies in incubators, quote unquote, defending itself. Those of us with brains know that that is not self-defense, that is aggression, and that is genocide. Whereas whenever any Lebanese person or Palestinian person throws even a rock at an Israeli tank, it's called terrorism. These words need to be thrown out the window. They have no meaning. And the reality is that, historically speaking, native people who are being exterminated by imperialism, by colonialism, are always portrayed as aggressive, horrible, backward savages. That's just the way the world works when it's run by the US. We need to reject this framing, and we all need to stand up and proudly say that Lebanon has the right to defend itself by any means necessary. Regardless of how anybody feels about Hezbollah as a political party, it doesn't matter right now. Lebanon is under existential threat, and Hezbollah are Lebanese people, and they are very much, in the right to use their weapons to defend themselves against people who are invading their country and destroying their homes, as they always have been. And the same thing applies to Palestinians. This actually, in international law, people have a right to armed resistance against invaders, against occupation, and against colonialism. So actually, we are on the right side of history. They are on the wrong side of history. And at some point, when the history books are written about this entire era, everybody's going to talk about or write about the fact that those people who picked up arms to fight the most powerful military force in the region are the bravest people and the most heroic people. And they defended their land, and, the entire security of Palestine and Lebanon is dependent on how they perform. And I do believe that they're ultimately going to come out victorious.
Do you think the diplomatic negotiations can get Lebanon any fair solution?
The negotiations taking place right now, led by the United States, are all a farce. It's all just to give Israel more time to try to achieve its military goals. The Americans should not be trusted. They lied in 2006 repeatedly with these fake negotiations that were all meant to just buy Israel more time to try to militarily defeat the resistance on the ground. And that's exactly what they're doing right now. These negotiations are not negotiations. It's gunboat diplomacy. That's an important phrase, gunboat diplomacy. They are trying to use force and violence to push for their quote unquote diplomatic solution, which is complete surrender by Lebanon to whatever Israel wants. And that's not going to happen. That's why every single time Amos Hochstein visits talking about peace, you see new massacres and you see Israel escalating their aggression against Lebanon, both before and after. The Israelis are trying to squeeze Lebanon militarily. They're trying to weaken Hezbollah militarily. And the Americans are trying to use, quote unquote, diplomacy to squeeze Lebanon politically. demanding that Lebanon elect a new president that America likes, demanding they push Hezbollah out of power, as if this organization doesn't exist anymore, as if it doesn't represent a big chunk of Lebanese people. It's just not going to happen. So we have to understand that the Americans are in the driver's seat. They like to act like, no, it's just the crazy Israelis. We can't control them. We're doing our best to end this conflict. No, they're not. All of those weapons being dropped on the heads of children in Lebanon are given to Israel by the United States. All of that is given permission to drop those bombs by the United States. So the U.S. is not our friends. Amos Hochstein is not our friend. In fact, he's an ex-Israeli soldier. So these negotiations, they're going to keep going until Israel feels like it has no more ability to fight. It's going to become a war of attrition. And by then, what happens on the ground, the military battles will determine the diplomacy, not the other way around.
Do you think it's possible to end Hezbollah? Is it possible? I mean, it's an idea in every, let's say, majority of the Lebanese people. Can something like that be finished?
No, I don't think it's possible to end Hezbollah. I don't think it's possible to end Hamas. I don't think the idea is it's not possible to end resistance. Mm-hmm. As long as this genocidal, expansionist settler state exists and tries to steal land and kill people's families and bomb their homes, resistance to it will exist, whether it's called Hamas, whether it's called Hezbollah, whether it's called, this or that army. It doesn't matter. But also, yes, when it comes to Hezbollah, this is not just some armed military wing that showed up in Lebanon. These are Lebanese people who are supported by a huge number of Lebanese people. I know there's a lot of Lebanese people who don't support Hezbollah. That doesn't mean they're going to stop existing, because at the end of the day, this is part of the fabric of Lebanese society, is this organization. So they were voted into power by huge numbers of people who still support them. Their entire base, their entire community is being subjected to displacement right now. The Israelis think that this is somehow going to make them turn on Hezbollah. No, it's going to make people believe in resistance even more. This has never worked. This counterterrorism technique that they call it, it hasn't worked anywhere. The U.S. has tried to use it, and it hasn't worked for Israel. I mean, Israel's been around since 1948. Have they been able to get rid of resistance in Lebanon ever? No. It's just become stronger, fiercer, more powerful, and more committed to resistance. And the same goes for Palestine. So no, I don't think Hezbollah is going to stop existing. And I'll say one more thing about that. Militarily speaking, Israel did weaken Hezbollah, right? They killed Hassan Nasrallah. They took out the entire senior leadership. They bombed a lot of their weapons depots. What do we see after that huge blow to Hezbollah that would have incapacitated a lot of other militaries around the world? We see that they are still fighting. Their units are still intact in the south, and they're putting up a fierce battle against Israeli invaders. And every single day, they're firing over 100 missiles into Israel. They were even able, for the first time ever, to hit Netanyahu's residence with a drone. I mean, that's a huge military accomplishment. So this is not an organization that's about to disappear. Far, far from it. And any of the people sitting in Tel Aviv or in Washington who think that Hezbollah is about to be defeated or that they can get rid of this organization, I mean, they're delusional.
Yeah. I wanted to ask you about the drone that hit Netanyahu's house. Do you think, like we saw the attempt from Hezbollah to assassinate, let's say, Netanyahu, do you think it's going to be justified, the assassination of Netanyahu, the baby killer, as the world is calling him? Do you think it's going to be justified just as the assassination of Hassan Nasrallah was justified?
You know, it's funny because the people who own the media, the corporate media in the US or in the West, they're all imperialists. They all support Israel. So they give the impression that the killing of Hassan Nasrallah was celebrated by the whole world, when actually a lot of the world mourned that killing, across the global south especially, across Latin America, across the Middle East, and across Asia. He was mourned because he's been seen as a leader, not just in Lebanon, but a revolutionary leader, much in the way that Che Guevara is seen and celebrated by people around the world till now, but also killed by the CIA and called a terrorist. Whereas someone like Netanyahu, if he were to be assassinated, you would see this entire corporate media apparatus say, oh my God, this is so horrible. They tried to kill a head of state. This is an important person. But you know what? I think we both know the majority of the world would be relieved to see Netanyahu disciplined or punished in any way, because the majority of the world sees this man as a disgusting baby killer in the image of Hitler, honestly. So I think we have to be careful of not taking the narrative of like what the New York Times or CNN is telling us, because that is not how the majority of the world feels. That's just how the ruling class in the US feels. So who would justify the punishment of Netanyahu? Certainly not the people in DC, but I think a lot of people around the world are relieved at the idea at this point of Israel being punished and dismantled, because the majority of the world is seeing what we're seeing. They're seeing dismembered and mutilated children. And they're seeing on their screens, and they're seeing Israeli soldiers and Israeli politicians celebrating it. And they're disgusted by Israeli society. And they're recognizing more and more that this settler colonial regime needs to be dismantled immediately. I mean, the only thing standing in the way of that is the US and its propaganda apparatus that wants to tell us up is down and resistance is terrorism and genocide is self-defense. But people aren't believing it anymore.
Yeah. Well, they said that Hassan Nasrallah's assassination made the world better. I know you don't agree on that, but do you think the assassination of Netanyahu will make the world better?
I have to be careful how I phrase my words, because I am sitting in America. I do think taking Netanyahu, removing him from power, would absolutely make the world a better place, because this man is high on hate. He's high on fake victory, and he has an expansionist agenda. He is a destroyer. And it's all in his interest, right? His self-interest. I mean, Israel would be this way, I think, no matter who was in charge. They would be destroying Gaza. They'd be destroying Lebanon. They'd be trying to take over the region. But Netanyahu has an added element of the fact that he's trying to preserve his political career. And his political career and his ability to stay out of prison is dependent on the war, the genocide, to keep going. This is a man whose entire ability to stay in power literally needs genocide. He doesn't deserve to be in power. And I mean, he needs to be removed. I'll say this. Netanyahu, we shouldn't see him as necessarily the main problem in Israel. This is an Israeli societal problem. It is an Israeli government problem, because we see the opposition leaders in Israel, like Benny Gantz and Yair Lapid, saying that they would be doing the same things. So at the end of the day, what needs to happen, more than just Netanyahu being removed from power, is this government, this country, there needs to be outside intervention to literally dismantle this regime. Never in our lifetimes has there been a situation that is like that needs humanitarian military intervention more than what we're witnessing with what Israel's doing in Gaza and Lebanon. And interestingly enough, Hezbollah did try to militarily intervene. Yemen did try to military intervene. The weakest powers in the region, who are under sanction and have the fewest resources, did try to intervene to stop this. The big powers in the world are all either complicit or they're cowards, and they refuse to step in. And until something like that happens, you get rid of Netanyahu, you're going to have another one come along and do the same thing.
Do you think Netanyahu's plan to place new borders in the Middle East and to get where he wants to see a great Israel's map, do you think it's going to succeed?
I mean, look, nothing is guaranteed. I don't want it to succeed. I don't want this project of Greater Israel to succeed. Israel can destroy a lot of things around it. They have the capacity to, and they're doing it. Will it be a sustainable project for the future? I don't think so. This is not a sustainable project. A country that is dependent on killing everyone around it indefinitely cannot prosper, cannot succeed, because people will always resist it. So no, I guess in the long run, I don't think a Greater Israel in the long-term future is going to be a successful project, because too many people around it won't allow it. That said, how many people is Israel going to kill in the process of it destroying itself? That's, I think, the bigger question. How much destruction do they get to wreak across the region before they're brought to their knees and forced to stop? I don't know. I mean, you look in the past, you have to look at other wars, genocides of the past to see what it takes, the sacrifice it takes to defeat a more powerful enemy. Vietnam took more than a decade. But the Vietnamese, the North Vietnamese, they did win in Vietnam. They pushed the Americans out. And it's a really powerful country today, but a lot of people were killed in the process. Algeria, you know, with far inferior power, defeated the French. But 1.5 million Algerians were killed in the process in the course of 10 years. So liberation means a lot of sacrifice. But I think ultimately, those whose land it belongs to, and those who are more committed, will be able to defeat those who are willing to more quickly get on a plane and leave because they're settlers.
Do you think Lebanon can win this war?
Yes, I do think Lebanon can win this war. That doesn't, you know, I don't want to be delusional or romantic about what that means. It's going to mean a lot of destruction. There's no question. We're seeing it happen now. But because the goalposts for victory are different for Lebanon versus Israel. For Israel, they have to be able to hold territory and basically occupy and destroy something they can't destroy, which is armed resistance. For Lebanon, it means surviving. These are two very different things. And I'll also add for Israel, this is a settler country. It's dependent on a constant influx of Jews from around the world to increase their demographic majority or to maintain their demographic majority over the population they rule over, which is non-Jewish. In order to have that system maintain itself, you need that constant influx of people from around the world. Nope. Who wants to go live in Israel now? Like, it's a shrinking country. Hezbollah has made the north unlivable. It's every day people are going to shelters because they're being fired at from Lebanon, from Gaza, from Yemen, from Iraq. Like, they're being fired at all the time, from Iran even now. Who wants to go live like that? People don't want to. People who have Western passports who live in the US or Europe, they're not going to leave their comfortable lifestyles to go live in a country where they have to spend some of their time in a shelter and constantly be at war and basically fight and die on the front lines of imperialism. So that's what Israel needs to be victorious. And it's not going to happen. Whereas in Lebanon, people don't have a choice. It's their land. It's their homes. They've been displaced before. They've gone back and rebuilt before, and they'll do it again because the Lebanese don't have the luxury that Israel has that Israelis have, the majority of Israelis have, which is to get on a plane and go back to, you know, Germany or Poland or Brooklyn, New York or LA, you know? So the goalposts for victory are different. And ultimately, I think Lebanon will succeed.
Do you think Trump's triumph in the elections can help Lebanon in any way? Or is it going to get any worse after that?
Listen, I think that Trump is really unpredictable. But if you think about the people who he will put in power to advise him, people like Jared Kushner, his son-in-law who wants to build villas on the coast of Gaza, and resettle it, or, you know, people who are giving him money, people like Miriam Adelson, the wife of the right-wing late billionaire Sheldon Adelson, who funds Birthright Israel and wants Israel to nuke Iran. You know, Trump is a scary figure because he's going to be advised by people like that. So I don't think that Trump being in power is going to be better for the region. I also don't think that Kamala Harris being in power is going to be better for the region because no matter who's in power in the US, Democrats or Republicans, they will support everything Israel does. So, you know, I think that this is just a detail that doesn't really make much of a difference for the fact that Israel will continue to get away with whatever it wants to do. Based on how the U.S. treats it, that won't change. The only thing that will change Israel's behavior is armed resistance to Israeli aggression, is Israelis having to face the consequences, material consequences for carrying out genocide, as well as the rest of the world stepping up and getting out of their cowardly corners and isolating Israel economically, politically. Until those things materialize, we're not going to see much of a change. And as long as the US is allowed to, dominate and turn this world into a very dark place, not much is going to change. So yeah, for Lebanon and for Gaza, I don't think Trump versus Kamala Harris is going to make too much of a difference for how things work out.
Do you think what's happening in Lebanon and Gaza, what the Americans are seeing is happening in Lebanon and Gaza, is going to affect somehow the elections in the US?
Yes, I actually do think that there's a very good chance that Kamala Harris might lose because Arab Americans are so angry, as they should be, that she is, as vice president, overseeing the dropping of bombs on their families. Not just in Gaza, but also now in Lebanon. So we have swing states in the US. These are states that basically determine who wins. And those are the states of places like Michigan and Pennsylvania and North Carolina. And in those places, because of Arab American anger at Kamala Harris, she is either neck and neck with Trump or she's losing to him. So I do think that if Kamala Harris loses, it will be because she chose to support genocide over winning.
Yeah. I want to ask you a final question, Rania. Last time I was speaking to you on the phone, you told me that you'd really like to come back to Lebanon. How do you wish to see Lebanon when you do come back?
Well, I live in Lebanon, so I plan to come back as long as the airport's open after the elections.
Yeah.
I'm scared of what I'm going to see because I left in the middle of September before the pager attacks. And I know now there's over 1 million people displaced. A lot of buildings have been bombed. There's regular Israeli bombings. It's really scary because you never know what Israel's going to bomb next. I want to see Lebanon liberated and free from this psychotic settler state. I want to see Lebanese people able to develop their country and have sovereignty over their country and have a Lebanese army that has the capacity to defend the country, because we don't have that right now because the US won't allow it. I want to see a Lebanon where, there's no country that gets to come in and say, you have to do things this way and this way, where the people of Lebanon can forge their own path in the interests of their own people. Right now, we can't develop. We can't have that because there's this existential threat of the US-backed Israeli state that is stepping on our necks. And until we remove the person who's stepping on our necks, we can't develop our country. We're always going to exist in this fragile state of potential war. My entire life, I grew up in the US, but I visited Lebanon, and my entire life, every summer I visit, everyone's like, is a war going to happen? Is a war going to happen? This is how Lebanon has to exist because it lives next to Israel, and it's not fair. And so I want to see that threat removed. I want Lebanon and the people there to have the security and the capacity to defend that security that every other state in the world is afforded.
Lebanese American journalist Rania Khalek, thank you for being with us in the show today. It's a great honor. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's my honor to be with you.